made it to Friday. I am so glad you're here. Hello. This is the Banfield Show. I have a lot of not politics. This week has been all politics. So tonight, no politics, just true crime. And I'm going to start with the Amityville Horror. And if you're my age, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're younger than me, you probably think it's a whole new story. And we're both right. Here's the deal. Less than 2 miles away from the old Amityville horror house with the two windows that are seared into your memory from the 1970s horror movie, there's another horror house. And I'm not sure which one's more gross and which one's more crimey. I can say this. The old Amityville horror house was like supernatural stuff that freaks me out. And the new Amityville horror house is not supernatural. It's human natural, and it freaks me out. I'm going to tell you everything about what happened in that house. Here's a hint. It's uninhabitable because the pipes are clogged with people, pieces of people. I'll tell you who the people are who were arrested, what else they found in the house, and what the hell it had to do with that psycho story of body parts that a poor middle schooler found earlier days ago. That's coming up. Also, I got another letter. I love letters, but I particularly love to get letters from serial killers. I know it's weird, but it's what I do, and I think you like it too, because you're watching a true crime show. The Happy Face Killer wrote me another letter. And if you've been watching regularly, you know the first one was like, kind of like what he does every day. It was very interesting to sort of hear what his regular routine was. And then the second letter, not so nice. Basically, take a hike. I mean, he really wasn't too keen on talking to me anymore. And then I got a third one. But the third one is odd. And how do I put this? It kind of says what he would like to do to his daughter in terms of turning her loose in the prison population. Yeah. I'm going to read it all for you in a minute. Then there's this. How did they miss the warning signs in Reno? Because honest to God, I have an 18-year-old and an almost 17-year-old, and this 17-year-old girl in Reno should be picking out her prom dress, right? Talking about boys and all that stuff, maybe makeup or Snapchat. Instead, she's talking to 911 about how she killed her family and why she was really turned on by it and all the other things about torture and murder and blood and gore and guts and screaming that made her hot in her private parts. I can't make this stuff up. Swear to God. What I can tell you, though, is somehow a 2-year-old survived the carnage. I'm going to explain what happened in that house. It's a bizarre story because, again, we're talking about a 17-year-old girl, not the Happy Face Killer or a serial killer. But let's start here. I love stories like this. The year was 1979, and the house was on a quiet street in a nice neighborhood in a Long Island town called Amityville. Now, honestly, I'm from the middle of Canada, and in 1979, I was only 12, and I knew nothing about Long Island, but I had heard of Amityville. Everybody had. And that is because of the Hollywood blockbuster that laid bare the story of a haunted house that was filled with real-life demons and stories of terror.
28 days after the Lutz family moved into their dream house, they were running for their lives. What happened to them is an experience in terror you will never forget, and you will believe in the Amityville Horror.
I am not over those windows. I am not over that voiceover. I'm not over so many of the scenes in that movie. And the name Amityville, it still sends a chill through my bones when I hear it. And I live here in this area. Like, it's so crazy. Which is why what happened this week in Amityville, just down the street from that haunted horror house, it's got people from my generation stopped in their tracks. Because you might call it the Amityville Horror 2.0. Only this time, it wasn't supernatural. The devil came in human form. And before I take you inside the new Amityville house and explain what happened, I want to give you a little background. And I also want to give you another horror story on Long Island last week that we had no idea was even connected to the new Amityville horror house. So let me just walk you through it. You may have already heard about a middle school girl who was on her way home from school when she came across a severed human arm. The reason that picture is actually out in public is because there are tattoos. And the police needed help identifying because there were no fingertips on that arm and that hand. And when the police called in the canines, they found even more body parts strewn all over the place. And suddenly they found 2 human heads. So now they knew they had 2 victims, not one. It was a man and it was a woman, and they were both in their 50s. Weirdly, they are not releasing the names of these 2 victims, but they do say that they lived together in Yonkers. And if you know New York, Amityville and Yonkers are not close. They're 45 miles apart. On a good day, that's like an hour drive. On a bad day, 2. So that was all weird. And then police went ahead and revealed that they'd arrested 4 people in connection with the body parts that the middle schooler found. And now we come full circle back to the new Amityville horror house, because police say that at least 3 of the people they arrested for the body parts live in the Amityville home. And so they raided that home. And here is what they found in that home earlier this week. The drains, the shower, the toilets, the pipes were all clogged with human body parts. It was so bad that the authorities described the home as, quote, uninhabitable because of the clogged pipes and what was clogging them. They also discovered meat cleavers. They found butcher knives and, quote, a significant amount of blood. Oof. So that's in the Amityville home, the new Amityville 2.0 home. And the 4 people that were charged, they have weird charges, but kind of not weird. So it's concealing a human body, tampering with evidence, and hindering an investigation. Wait, but not murder. 2 people are all chopped up and their body parts are strewn all over the place where a middle school could find them, and then they clog the rest of the body parts into the drains and the pipes, and no murder? Not yet. Here's the other weird part. We have no idea what the connection is, if any, to the victims. But we do know the names now of the 4 people who were arrested. They are officially suspects. Their names are Alexis Nieves, I assume that's the pronunciation, and Stephen Brown. He's the guy in the hoodie. Can't see his face in that picture, but he's 44 years old. Amanda Wallace is the one with the reddish hair who's going to try to cover up but didn't quite get there in time for the photo. And then Jeffrey Mackey, who's got the beard and did not cover up his face. He's 38 years old. Amanda over there is 40. Yeah. And then the Nieves, she's only 33. This part kind of boils my blood here. They're walking freely outside the courthouse because they're not in jail. They were released because of bail reform. Apparently, those grisly charges that I read out, not grisly enough to qualify for bail. We do know they have GPS monitors and that the Suffolk County DA is pissed, outraged by the state laws that handcuffed him into having to let these people walk instead of putting them in jail with a high bail until he could figure out if there's going to be a murder, or at least a murder charge. It was quite a scene, though, when the press showed up at the courthouse and the suspects walked out. That happened on Wednesday, and I just want to give you a quick look at what it was like with the whole pushing and shoving of the reporters and the cameramen. Take a look.
This way. Babe, this way.
Put up my way. Don't ever put your hands on him. Don't ever put your hands on him.
Don't put your hands on him.
Yeah, it's a scene, as it should be. When there are body parts in a house in Amityville, and you were living there, and now you're out on bail, but you can't go back to your home because it's uninhabitable because there's too much blood, gore, and guts clogging the pipes, there's a camera or 2 that are going to show up. And there's a true crime show on Friday night called Banfield that is going to follow this story to figure out what on earth is going on. That's why I want to bring in Michael Malazchuk. He is the digital editor of the Long Island Press, and I am so glad you're here. I sense, though, Michael, you might be as confused as I am about this weird story. Amityville Horror. I don't even know if you're old enough to have gone through the terror that the rest of us all went through back in the 70s and the 80s with that movie. But I feel like I'm being plunged back into it. But this is real. What is your read on this entire series of events?
Well, you put it perfectly. I'm just as confused as you are. I don't know what to make of this. I don't know what happened. I don't know if this is a murder. I don't know if it's not, what happened, because this is extremely confusing. And for it to be Amityville again, it's just unbelievable. Amityville is really not a place where this kind of thing happens. It doesn't make local headlines on a daily basis for anything crazy. So it's like a twisted irony. It's just your average American suburb, but now it's associated with this, what you call the Amityville Horror 2.0. The original Amityville Horror, which aside from the ghosts, was also a mass murder. A young man murdered his entire family. And also the recently arrested alleged Long Island serial killer Rex Heuermann had storage units in Amityville that were searched, of course.
Yeah.
And it just, like I said, Amityville is just a common, everyday American suburb, but nationally it's known for these things. But it brings back all
the lore, right? Man, oh man, you might have almost forgotten some of that old stuff that, freaked us all out after the Hollywood blockbuster. But I'm still a little confused about the body parts that are found in Long Island and this home that we have on the screen that's on, I guess it's Railroad Avenue in Amityville. What led the police to the severed arm with the tattoos and the two human heads and the rest of the body parts to this house and those four people?
So we don't actually know that at the moment. What I can tell you is that if you look on a map, the body parts were found in Babylon, West Babylon, and Bethpage State Park. If you look on a map, Amityville is central to those locations. So it does make sense that that's where the perpetrators were operating out of. But again, we don't know. My guess is because they were able to identify the victim so fast, the woman is identified, the man is tentatively identified, they were able to make a connection to these four people right away.
I think it's like 5 miles from that home, which, by the way, now has two new iconic entry points, not windows, but two weird doors on the front that are mismatched. I don't understand also, Michael, why the police are so tight-lipped about the victims. Normally when there's a crime, we get victims identified. We hear a little bit about, who they were, where they were from, the backgrounds. They're not saying boo about these two victims, but they sure did release the severed arm and the tattoos, etc. Why are they staying so quiet?
Well, the only information we have right now is that the man is, like I said, tentatively identified, so they're not 100% sure yet. The woman is identified, but they haven't released pending notification of family. So I'm guessing we'll know that in a couple days, and hopefully we'll know, as you said, what maybe a couple from Yonkers was doing all the way down in Amityville.
Yeah, and what all four of these people arrested may have to do, if anything, with a potential double murder. We know that they're charged with dismemberments and, offering all sorts of indignities to a human body. But again, I always say yet. Michael Malazchuk, great of you to be here. Thank you so much for your help. And let's stay in touch on this one.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay, that brings me to John Halverson, because John Halverson is the attorney for one of those four suspects, Jeffrey Mackey. John, thank you for being up with me late tonight on a Friday night. I understand you've had a long day because you were in court this morning with your client, Jeffrey Mackey. Tell me everything. Why is your client embroiled in all of this?
I don't know if I can tell you everything, Ashley, but thank you very much for having me. I appreciate being here. And it's not normally how I spend a Friday night, but okay.
Me neither. So what do you know? Because obviously you've been served some paperwork on your client. He's facing some pretty grisly charges in an extraordinary crime that's being alleged. So what is it? Why is he even part of it?
Well, I'm not sure that he is part of it at this point. We have pled not guilty, and I have not received a lot of paperwork at this point. I've only received some basic paperwork. I've not received any discovery. I've not received any substantial paperwork to make any real determinations other than the conversations that I've had with my client.
What does he say?
Well, as you know, that's privileged. I can't go into what my client tells me. He told me he's not guilty. He told me he didn't do this. That's what he told me.
So here's what I don't understand, John. You'll have to bear with me. I understand you're sort of handcuffed by privilege, but your client, Jeffrey Mackey, lives in the home on Railroad Avenue. The home has been raided by the police and has been discovered to be uninhabitable because the pipes are all clogged with human body parts. Did he say anything about noticing the fact that the toilets and the drains wouldn't work because of all the blood and gore that was in them?
No, I think that you're mistaken on that point. From my understanding, and once again, I do not have paperwork. I do not have anything else other than some conversations I've had with the district attorney's office. But I think that the home was made inhabitable because of the investigation of the Suffolk County homicide detectives and collecting evidence. I believe that's what took place. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that when they collected the evidence, they had to collect pipes and bathroom fixtures and things like that. So I believe that's what made it uninhabitable, was their investigation and their collection.
Sure, and I respect that. Obviously, if there's junk in the drains, they're going to have to cut those drains up and find that evidence. No matter what, they did announce that there were human body parts and blood and flesh in the pipes. That's the curiosity I have about living in that home. And your client was living in that home. So what does he know about the condition of those pipes and what was in them?
I did not have that conversation with him.
What's his connection to the other three who are said to be residents? I think Stephen Brown, Amanda Wallace, and Jeffrey Mackey, your client, all live there. And then Alexis Nieves is said to be homeless, but it almost seems like she was staying there. What do you know about the connection between these four?
Well, I'm not sure of the other two, but I know being with my client and Ms. Nieves today, it seems as if they have a connection and that they are together.
So you're saying your client, Jeffrey Mackey, and Alexis Nieves are a couple?
That's what it seemed to me, being with them together today, and that's basically what my client has told me, yes.
Was she indeed homeless, or was she living in the home with Jeffrey Mackey and Stephen and Amanda?
I believe she was staying there.
She was staying there. Okay. And then what is Jeffrey, your client's connection to Stephen and Amanda, who are also living in that home? How do they all know each other?
Well, I'm not sure they had a long relationship, but I'll leave that to the investigators to find out and figure out. That's not for me to determine or to tell. That, once again, that's something my client has told me, and it's something that I consider privileged at this point.
Okay. Does your client think that Stephen and Amanda may have had something to do with the body parts in the drains?
I didn't ask him about other people. They have attorneys. I only spoke to my client about his actions and what he did. And once again, he's told me that he's not guilty of this. He did not do anything. And that's the information that I have.
Boy, I'm not getting anywhere. One last question. A lot of the neighbors said there's action all night long at that house. Do you know, John, if there was drug activity at that house, whether or not your client, Jeffrey Mackey, had anything to do with it? Was there drug activity regularly at that house?
I don't believe that to be the case.
Okay, well, you and I have to have another conversation on Monday or next week when we start to learn more about this, because this is pretty perplexing, and I can tell that you feel like you have a lot of interviewing still to do, too.
I do, and, this is 3 days old. I've had an opportunity to speak to my client a couple times, but I have no discovery. I have no information other than felony complaints, which tells me nothing. But, yeah, I'd be happy to discuss further.
So let's make a date. Yeah, let's make a date next week when we start to learn a little bit more, because this is the new Amityville horror, and you're now, going to be part of the script writing. Thank you, John Halverson. I appreciate it. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Okay. So coming up next, how much prison time does it take to cure a serial killer? because one of the worst in modern history thinks about 30 years ought to do it. He told me so himself. After a break, another handwritten letter from the happy face killer, only this one, not quite so happy. Details next. Leave it to a man called the happy face killer to say that decades in prison has cured him and that he's ready to join the rest of us out on the streets. Yeah, the happy face killer has, he's admitted to upward of 185 murders all over the place, multiple states, even though the prosecutors have only been able to prove 8. His real name is Keith Jesperson, but he got his nickname from all the taunting letters that he sent to the media and to the authorities, each of them signed with a smiley face. Keith Jesperson is writing different letters now, and I have just received my 3rd. Letter number 1 kind of outlined the typical day he has in his prison and why he thinks it's like a country club. Letter number 2, that had a markedly different tone, kind of shut me down, refusing an interview, and more or less told me to buzz off. But letter number 3 is a bit of a mix. It's got some kind of bizarre asks in there and then some scary threats. Not to me, though. He starts out by talking about another 25 to life conviction that's coming his way from Florida in just a matter of days, he says. And then he writes this next part, which I thought was really crazy. He says, I feel if I were let go, I'd never commit another crime. Freedom seems so special to me. Over the years, I've talked to several, I'm assuming inmates, who would be getting out after 30 years or so. Most are angry and want some kind of payback, only to leave prison and put it all behind them. Time behind bars has cured me. I am no longer that person that put me in here. Nevertheless, he does acknowledge he is not going to be getting out, ever, 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 never. And that his daughter, a prolific TV producer named Melissa Moore, is going to make sure that he is not forgotten. He says that the book his daughter wrote about him is being turned into a TV show and that he is going to be played by Dennis Quaid. I don't know if Dennis Quaid has agreed to it yet, but that has made the happy face killer quite happy. He likes Dennis Quaid. He is insistent, however, that his daughter is not telling the real story in her book. And that's when the letter starts kind of going dark. He says that his daughter's book is filled with lies, and he makes some not so subtle threats against her. This is what he writes about his daughter and her family. Quote, you know, they live just maybe 60 to 70 miles from me and will not come visit. She is scared to visit, fearful I'll get angry in the visit and hurt her. Some killers in here have told me to invite her in and ... That's where his thoughts just trail off. But then he picks up again and says, if they had a daughter like her doing her BS, they would take care of it at visiting. Yee. So he signs his letter to me, Keith, no happy face. I am joined now by an investigative journalist and a writer who knows a lot about this guy. M. William Phelps has recorded more than 100 hours of conversations with Keith Jesperson, and he is the host of the podcast Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps. It's great to have you with me. Thank you so much for joining. What's your read on all of it? Like letter 1, talking about the country club, letter 2, nasty to me, saying buzz off, and then letter 3, I'd turn my daughter, loose with the inmates.
Well, thanks for having me, Ashleigh. Call me Matthew. Look, this is typical Jesperson. I interviewed him for 10 years. And over that time, he wrote me 9,000 pages of letters. I have hundreds of pages of letters I haven't even opened yet because it's just psychobabble. It's the psychopath and his grandiose thinking. That's what they do, right? They have a need for stimulation. And once they're locked up, that need for stimulation just increases. And I read the letter this afternoon and I studied it a little bit, the latest one you got. And he's gloating in that letter. He's playing mind games. He likes to think people will listen to him. And he once told me this. He said, if you're a serial killer, people hang on every single word, right? They listen to you no matter what you say. So I would just say he's playing the cat and mouse game with you.
Matthew, you hit the nail on the head, because I am so fascinated by people who are so far outside the flock. And so one of the calls that you had, a Skype call with him, he described in gruesome detail what he did to one of his victims. And I hung on every word just because I can't imagine a human being doing this to another human being. I want to play that and then ask you about it on the other side. Have a listen.
She was dead when I got her up to mile marker 198, where I tied her by the ankles underneath my trailer, and I drove out onto the freeway and drove for about 12 miles with her face down on the pavement. And by the time the next cluster of vehicles caught up to me, I pulled over the side of the road, parked, got out with my side cutter pliers, cut the rope that was holding onto the truck, dragged what was left of her into the shoulder, and left her there.
Matthew, did the evidence back that up?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. What's interesting about that is how he delivers that, right? He delivers that as if he's talking about a baseball game that he had just come from watching. There's absolutely no empathy. There's no sympathy. It's very much, this is what I did. And you can see him. He kind of gets closer to the screen at some points because he really wants you to hear this. And it's all part of his psychopathy. It's all part of who he is inside. This is who he is, He speaks about the most horrific details like he did just there, as if it's soothing to him, right? It's easy for him to talk about it. This is funny to him. He gets a rush from it. Psychopaths, they need to get a rush. And when they're locked up, right, how do they get that rush? Well, they get it by sending you letters. Incidentally, you will never see a happy face emoji on a letter to you, because he'll get put in a hole for that, and all communication will be stopped if he doodles a happy face on anything.
I am going to call you back because I am fascinated by those who they just drift so far from the rest of us inside the flock of humanity. And so with your insight, this has been a great conversation, and I don't want it to end. Matthew Phelps, thank you so much for being on tonight. Really appreciate it. Look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Ashleigh.
All right, still to come. This is so hard to believe. 10 years ago today, March 8th, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared over the Indian Ocean. And for a decade now, investigators have been baffled. How did a plane carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew just vanish without a trace in this day and age? Well, now a U.S. company says it has new evidence that could finally pinpoint where the plane is and where all those people are. That's next. It's hard to believe that it was 10 years ago today. One of the biggest mysteries in aviation history basically just blew onto all of our headlines and all across every TV screen. It was this, the disappearance of Malaysia Air Flight 370. How could a Boeing 777 with 239 people on board literally just vanish? Just vanish out of the skies. In this day and age, that happened. And now here we are a decade later, mystery not solved. But investigators may just start looking for that plane again, and for those people again, which is really good news for the families. And frankly, it's really good news for the rest of us too, who've been left baffled for years. The mystery begins at midnight at Malaysia's main airport in the capital city of Kuala Lumpur. And not just midnight, the very first minute of midnight, March 8th, 2014. That's when Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 came alive, or at least the system that tracked it did. The SDU, or the Satellite Data Unit aboard that aircraft, logged on to something called the Inmarsat Communication Network. And that network is a system that communicates with and tracks aircraft around the world. At 12:27 a.m., Air Traffic Control gives Flight 370 permission to push back from the gate. And at 12:40, MH370 is cleared for takeoff. It's scheduled to arrive in Beijing at 6:30 a.m. And over the next 20 minutes, the Boeing widebody climbs to 35,000 feet. And at 1:19 a.m., it leaves Malaysian airspace.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night. Good night, Malaysian 370.
That was the final voice contact with MH370, but not the last contact. 2 minutes later, it disappears from Kuala Lumpur's radar, which is a sign that the aircraft's transponder is no longer functioning. But Malaysian military radar continues to track the plane, and that is when something unusual begins to happen. Flight 370 almost immediately begins to turn left until it's traveling in a southwesterly direction. 9 minutes later, at the direction of air traffic controllers in Vietnam, another plane attempts to contact Flight 370, but all they hear back is mumbling and static. At 1:52 a.m., Flight 370 reaches the southern end of Penang Island and then mysteriously turns again towards the northwest along the Strait of Malacca. Multiple attempts to make contact with 370 go unanswered. And at 2:03 a.m., the plane enters Cambodian airspace. At 2:22 a.m., Flight 370 is spotted on radar for the final time, about 230 miles northwest of Penang. But 3 minutes later, the plane's SDU, remember, the satellite data unit, that reconnects with the satellite communication network and begins hourly automated digital handshakes with the satellites. They come in at 3:41, 4:41, 5:41, and 6:41 in the morning. At 8:11 a.m., Flight 370 makes one more handshake and then two partial handshakes 8 minutes later. And then nothing. Nothing ever again. No one ever hears from Malaysia Air Flight 370 ever again. The search that started soon after was the largest and most expensive in aviation history. 26 countries took part. It cost about $130 million, and it covered 46,000 square miles of ocean. Over the next 3 years, 18 bits of debris, considered very likely to have come from MH370, turned up on beaches in the western Indian Ocean. But the cause of what happened is still being debated. Initially, suspicion fell on 2 Iranian passengers who boarded the plane using stolen passports. Eventually, though, it was determined they were asylum seekers, not terrorists. And later, the investigation focused on the flight pilot, Zahari Ahmad Shah. Investigators found an elaborate flight simulator in his home. And a month before MH370 went missing, Shah conducted a simulated flight deep into the southern Indian Ocean, very similar to the path 370 took. Did Flight 370 disappear after a tragic onboard accident? Or was it a premeditated act of mass murder-suicide? We'll probably never know, unless or until the wreckage and the bodies are found. Still to come tonight. It may be sick and twisted, but we have heard this happen before. A killer admits to twisted fantasies about rape and torture before murdering their family. Rarely, though, is the killer a teenage girl. We are taking you to Reno, Nevada next in a story that froze even the hardened investigators.
reality shows.
And when we don't want to pay, your mom and I can still get hundreds of channels for free.
Sling is really keeping this family together.
You have no idea.
You have no idea.
Sling, the live TV you love. Sling.
I just couldn't resist the urge to kill somebody. This is not a quote from the Happy Face Killer or any other serial killer. It is from a 17-year-old girl in Reno, Nevada, and what she told the 911 operators after killing her father and 5-year-old brother a month ago. Police say it was February 9th. Mashenka Reed, that 17-year-old, sent her dad to the grocery store to buy some time and figure out how to use his handgun. And when he got back, Mashenka met him in the garage, opened fire, killing him on the spot. And then the police say she found her autistic brother playing on his tablet and shot him twice in the head, killing him. But when she set her sights on her toddler sister in the back bedroom, that door was locked. And that's when she told the police she, quote, kind of woke up and called 911. Mashenka admitted to having fantasies about murder and rape and torture after her mother left the family back in December. She said that she would, quote, feel hot in her face and in her private parts, quote, whenever she saw blood or heard screaming, or whenever her dad would break down over his broken family, end quote. Tonight, the teenage girl faces 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder, but there are still so many questions about this, and that's why I called Catherine Ramsland. Dr. Ramsland is a professor of forensic psychology. She's the author of several books, including How to Catch a Killer. Dr. Ramsland, what is your take on a 17-year-old girl who should be picking out her prom dress and instead says she just kind of woke up in the middle of a killing spree and called 911?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have the whole story of what she's been exposed to in that family. We do know that her mother abandoned the family in December. That made her feel frustrated and vulnerable. And then she was tasked with taking care of her younger siblings, one of whom had special needs, which is not something she really was prepared for. And I think became resentful and frustrated, began immersing in YouTube videos of people who were harming themselves. And that made her feel powerful. And that gave her what we call rehearsal fantasies for trying to get her power back in this situation that was frustrating her. So it kind of makes sense. She's the one who's laid it all out. She had actually locked her younger sister, her 2-year-old sister, in the bedroom herself, and had, I think, to protect her. And then in the end, after she killed her father and brother, decided to end the whole thing. She even talked about stabbing herself.
So what I don't understand is she said to the police that listening to recorded audio of people inflicting pain on themselves gave her sort of a heightened desire to torture someone by choking them or shooting them or stabbing them or setting them on fire. And she said it also made her aroused. Does all of that make sense to you?
Yeah, arousal isn't necessarily sexual. It can just be the excitement of feeling powerful. And we don't know.
She said she felt hot in her private
is.
Parts, though. So
yeah,
I sort of thought that had to be sexual. I felt hot in my face and hot in my private parts, she said.
It's arousal for sure, but is it about sex? Not necessarily. It can be just about a sense of domination and control in a situation where she was feeling a lack of control and feeling vulnerable. But we don't know if she might have been somebody who harmed herself in the past. We don't know enough about her background. And it could be that she was drawn to those kinds of audios and videos and would listen to them and would experience probably a sense of feeling power over those situations by her being the one to inflict it rather than her being the one to receive it.
Just so bizarre to see a 17-year-old girl in a story that normally is about some psychopathic man. That's typically what we see. This is just so unusual. I always love it when you stop by. I hope it's not the last time. I look forward to our conversations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Ramsland. Okay, coming up next, sometimes when nature calls, it actually calls 911. A burglary suspect who decided to use the John right in the middle of his heist got a big surprise when the police showed up. And boy, did that ever make for a crappy day. I'm going to get to the bottom of it with the full video next.
And even here, in your neighborhood and around the world, Rotary is ensuring children grow up safe from preventable diseases.
If you are planning to go out and commit a crime, maybe use the bathroom before you leave your house. Why do you ask? I'm going to take you to Lakewood, Colorado, where a burglary suspect learned the lesson the hard way. It appears that mid-heist, he was in such desperate need of a toilet, he helped himself to one of the bathrooms inside the home that he was robbing. What he didn't know, though, was that he had tripped the alarm while breaking in. And that alerted the police, who were there within minutes. And as police do, you can see on your screen, they clear houses room to room, eventually coming upon the closed bathroom door. And in a gift to comedians everywhere, what happened next was captured on their live police body cam. You're welcome.
1041. We'll get some guy yelling at us and stand by. So I'm gonna back up. So you guys can stand up. Ready? Yep.
Michael, please, show me your hands. Hands up. Stand up. Stand up.
Okay,
walk this way. What's that? Walk towards me.
Yes, sir.
Keep your hands up. Stop there. Stop there.
Stop right there. All right.
Literally caught with his pants down. As in, literally pants down. I know what you're thinking. I thought the same thing. They're not going to let him wipe? Like, literally, they don't even let him wipe. I wonder if he had to go to jail like that. Okay, look, maybe in an act of mercy, they decided not to release his name, and they blurred his face and his Johnson. But that is where their goodwill ended in this story, because they did actually slap him with a burglary charge, and then the full humiliation forever and ever, amen, of being the guy caught on the John by the cops while he decided to stop and take a dump during his heist. How's that for your Friday night? Thank you so much for sticking with me and indulging me in the potty humor. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris Cuomo. I hope you have a happy weekend. And shouldn't we all be going, hooray, the president made it through a speech without passing out, right? Is that why so many of you watched the State of the Union last night? To see, literally, not figuratively, whether or not the president would make it through.